So, what made you want to study the history, like specifically racism, and let's talk about your perspective on racism and how it might like differ. Like, what's your perspective?
Yeah, so I think the thing that motivates me, even still, to really study deeply racism, ideas about anti-racism, and so far, really does go back to the traumas that I experienced as a child and then as a young adult. The idea that there are injustices in the world that are out of people's control for the most part, that has always resonated with me as a victim of child abuse, right? Mm-hmm. And because I attribute really the trajectory of my life to my access to books, education, all of that, I do tend to look at education particularly as a source of liberation because it was for myself. And so when I started figuring out what do I want to study, it was from this sort of mindset and perspective that led me toward African American literature primarily, because I viewed the literature itself as working against the sort of forces that I saw myself working against, that I saw other people working against. And I viewed the literature as a form of activism, and I viewed my study of the literature as a form of activism, and then my teaching and writing about the literature as a form of activism. Mm-hmm. And it is through my extensive study of not just African American literature, but I also specialize in Caribbean and American literature, broadly speaking, that I came to see that the production of race across centuries, we're talking, has always been nefarious and has always meant that the racialization of people across time, across space, has led to the marking out of groups as fit for subjugation and oppression, and the marking out of other groups as fit for more access, unequal access to power.
So you're saying this is bigger than just, so this is systematic for since before time. Like, you think this is, explain that a little deeper for me, for those like me who needs a better explanation.
Sure. So the term race and what we think of as being race hasn't always meant black, white, Asian, indigenous people. It hasn't always meant that. It once upon a time, going back to, let's say, the 1300s, 1400s in Europe, the term really was a reference of like family. It was a caste system in a way. It was about nationality. It wasn't about how we think of race in America now. And so the idea of race started to be reconstructed after those same Europeans started traveling and having more interactions, increased interactions with people who didn't look the same as them. So when you study the literature, you begin to see how these Europeans were talking about other people as being black, as being brown, as being yellow, as being red, and theorizing what does blackness mean? Let's focus on blackness. What does blackness mean? And in focusing on what blackness meant, then the inverse of that is like they're writing what whiteness means as well. And